This is the story of one of the most explosive and difficult horses I've ever worked with, a horse who was screaming to be heard.
Hop in my getaway car, let's go just for the night. Nowhere is ever too far, baby, all we got is time. A small town, run down, so let's run away from here. From the ghost to the coast, where everything is clear. Follow me from the past into the future. We don't need any bags or any pastors. Let's be in the present. I don't wanna sweat it. I just wanna start all over. Just wanna start all over. All over. We don't need the memories, just need to wipe the slate clean. Go from chaos to the peace, I need to focus on me. A small town, run down, so let's run away from here. From the ghost to the coast, where everything is clear. Follow me from the past into the future. We don't need any bags or any pastors. Let's be in the present. I don't wanna sweat it. I just wanna start all over. Just wanna start all over. All over. Follow me from the past into the future. We don't need any bags or any pastors. Let's be in the present. I don't wanna sweat it. I just wanna start all over.
In the 2 years since I had last seen him, Magic's turnout situation had improved in that he was out longer, but the paddock was still small and he was still out alone, which means that he wasn't getting as much stimulation as he would if he had more space and had turnout with other horses. So he was still very explosive, and I saw the worst of his explosive behavior after I worked with him in the round pen and was trying to lead him back to his paddock, and it was still very dangerous, unpredictable, and very explosive. Applying pressure to the halter would aggravate his behavior and he'd be more likely to explode more. So I was of the mind that I think a lot of his aversion to halter pressure came from being previously punished by the staff that brought him in and out, because they viewed the behavior as a naughty behavior, and also because he was so difficult to handle. They just wanted to do what they felt they needed to do to feel safe, but it did make him more reactive. The punishment didn't help with his anxiety, it actually increased it, and it made it so that even when you were applying a little bit of pressure just to ask him to go a certain direction, he would often rear straight up or buck because he found it so bothersome. So what I took to was taking him into the round pen and doing really chill, easy sessions where my only goal was to have him stand quietly and then follow me when I walked off and be responsive to really light amounts of pressure. And then I was rewarding him with both food and scratches because he really enjoyed being groomed. And this helped him start to settle in the round pen and not expect it to be a big workout or something where he was going to be running around and being highly explosive. And it also reconditioned the halter pressure cues so he did not find them to be so aggravating and aversive. He did still have his moments while he was in the round pen, but he was honestly really easy to handle in the round pen, especially in comparison to how he was in the indoor when I first worked with him. And when he had his moments, he would settle and come closer to me to look for guidance and wasn't so explosive when I was working with him here. But walking back to his paddock is where we saw a lot of these behaviors re-arise. And as he started to go and get more worked up, he would just get more and more difficult. And he wasn't very responsive to any type of pressure because it would just add to his anxiety. So what I took to help start to address this was just trying to redirect his behavior to grazing so that he'd find a calming behavior that he could focus on to start to reduce his anxiety and stand still and find a better coping mechanism than jumping up and leaping in the air. Because at its core, a lot of his big reactions like this were him just trying to cope with an excess amount of stress. But he did it in a very dangerous way and it wasn't preferable. So rather than looking at this through the lens of me versus him, where I feel like I have to win and I have to show him who's boss, I looked at it through the lens of this horse is struggling to cope. He's having a very hard time self regulating. I need to give him safer healthier self-regulation tools that don't endanger me and that also help him towards the path of maintaining safer behaviors where he's not being this explosive. And grazing was the easiest and most accessible means of doing this because he found the grass to be higher value than any of the food that I had on me. And it was something where there's lots of grass on the whole walk back. So I would immediately try to redirect him to grass. I would stand with him and let him graze for a bit. And then I would gradually try to lure him back to the paddock by like lightly applying pressure and then clicking and rewarding him when he responded and then letting him graze again and just taking breaks so that he was able to self-regulate his own behavior before it became too much. And with some repetition, this did start to get better where his explosives started to get much less prolonged and much less high intensity, and he would start to walk back more calmly to the paddock. And then the more days he had out where it wasn't this high stress thing, the better he became to lead in and out from the area that he lived. But we still had our moments and it did take time. Another layer to his behavioral problems that we discovered was that his feet were very sore. So, this also aggravated his explosive behavior because he would jump up in the air and have these big reactions, and then he'd be landing on sore feet and feeling pain. And then that just added to the level of anxiety that he felt. So, another factor in addressing his behavioral problems was recognizing the fact that he could also have physical pain along with the emotional struggles that he had with regulating. And while people could argue, oh, if he's in pain, he shouldn't be leaping around like that, he is also a horse and he's just reacting in the only ways that he knew how to do. So, this was a really huge part of helping him was giving him the benefit of the doubt, recognizing what his likely triggers are and slowly working on the triggers. And in my opinion, as a horse trainer and professional equine behavior consultant, this really wasn't a training issue so much as addressing his triggers and helping to alleviate the triggers by providing more species appropriate care and then giving him skills to help him cope better. And that was an important factor in the meantime before we could address everything because it did take some time to get him into a new living situation and start to address his hoof problems. But the biggest factors that were leading to his behavioral problems and his lack of predictability were the fact that he had such a negative association with coming out and walking on hard ground because his feet were sore, and then also such an abundance of energy because he didn't have the ability to self exercise to the extent that he needed to as a young horse. So, a lot of the work that I did with him was just helping teach him regulation tools and then also starting to slowly work my way through the physical and emotional problems that were contributing to making him have such a hard time self-regulating. So it looks like I'm really doing nothing because that's what a lot of our sessions were about. He did not need to be worked hard and worked to the point of exhaustion to try to resolve the behavior because all that would do is get him fitter while not teaching him any actual skills on how to handle his anxiety in a safer, more predictable way. So a lot of what I did was just bringing him in and out of his paddock to this round pen, grooming him, practicing leading around, practicing halting, letting him look at anything that he's afraid of, and just trying to wind down how big and sudden his reactions to new things were. And the repetition of this helped him to realize that he didn't have to predict some big anxiety filled event when I was taking him out. And over time, it started to create a conditioned response that made him much easier to handle. But the other factors were also addressing the things that were leading to his anxiety in the first place. Here, he's pointing to where he wants to be groomed. So I look at where he points and then I'm going to groom him there. And also listening to him and having this type of communication with him where he felt that my behavior was more predictable and he knew what to expect next. That also helped bring him some safety and reliability in the work that I did with him, where it helped him to settle more because he knew what to expect. I would love for Magic's story to serve as a reminder for people that just like humans, horses struggle with their own issues physically and emotionally. And a lot of times we handle dangerous horses or unpredictable horses. They are struggling with things themselves. And instead of people getting mad at them and punishing them and trying to show them who's boss, what they actually need is more gentleness and understanding because it doesn't help. Magic's pushy behavior and explosive behavior and behaviors that people would view as naughty were completely related to his lack of ability inability to self-regulate and the lack of tools that he had to allow him to do so. And expecting him to cope with those types of things without providing him actual coping mechanisms or dealing with the causes that led to his explosive behaviors is just a very unfair expectation to have. He does need to learn safer behaviors, and this isn't to justify how he behaved dangerously, but it's to point out the fact that far too many trainers expect horses to cope in environments that are not serving their needs, and then when they cannot do it, they punish them. And that's not really fair, because most of us would not thrive in environments where our needs aren't being met. We would also develop problem behaviors and coping mechanisms that aren't super healthy. So expecting horses to be able to handle those things better than most people can really isn't fair. The main thing that we need to be looking at is where the behavioral problems stem from, because all behaviors are just a symptom of an underlying problem, an underlying emotion, or something that the horse is struggling with. They don't just do these things for no reason at all. There is always a reason behind it. And Magic is a great example of that, because he's the type of horse that a lot of people would just rule as disrespectful and unruly and needing to be put in his place, but he really just needed to be understood. So here you can see what a difference giving him a new coping mechanism actually made for him, because he did have a reaction, but then he just immediately went to grazing and started to settle. And you can actually watch how his level of reactivity slows as he's given other coping mechanisms. Had I just punished him and just shanked the rope or flicked the rope at him or smacked him or did any of those type of punishment style things to try to correct the behavior, all I would be doing is further suppressing the level of anxiety he was feeling while offering him no coping mechanisms, and it wouldn't have helped. This is Magic after he had his shoes pulled and he's wearing cloud hoof boots because his feet were very sore. You can see he's walking better, he's walking much more quietly, and he goes directly to grazing with no antics at all. This is a day where I was incredibly proud of him, because I had him graze and then we walked up to a trailer, which is a really big trigger for horses because horse trailers are scary and not fun in most horses' opinions. So I was expecting a far bigger reaction than this, but he walked right up to the horse trailer, he checked it out, and he loaded within the span of 3 or 4 minutes. And I was so proud of him, because this is not something that he could have coped with easily before at all, because it's just such a big trigger, and even little things were setting him off before. So it's a great example of how well teaching them new coping mechanisms and starting to address their needs can actually work in helping them. Here he is unloading at the new barn, the barn that I live at, and he was really sweaty and nervous in the trailer, but he unloaded pretty nicely, and then he walked to his paddock pretty nicely, and he settled in really well. Again, these are things that he would have really struggled to cope with in the past, because he could barely handle the bare minimum, and he would be set off by tiny little things in the environments, like a bird fluttering or just a new sound. So the fact that he was able to cope with this is a testament to helping him realize new coping mechanisms, addressing underlying pain, and then slowly working to meet his needs. So here he now has access to an in and out paddock that is long enough that he can canter up and down it. And then he started going out in group turnout on a track system with the herd. And as you can see, he absolutely loves playing with the other geldings, and he was getting his fill for personal exercise and playtime with other horses. And this completely started to rectify a lot of his problem behaviors that he still had, one of which was nipping at people because he would get overstimulated and then he would try to play, and he was way too mouthy. But now that he has other horses to play with and interact with, he doesn't feel the same need to do that with people, and he also has far less excess energy, and he's much more manageable, even with less handling than what he might have had at his other place. Like, I'm not doing as lengthy of sessions with him, I'm not doing as frequent of sessions with him, and he's coping way better and he's way more manageable. So this is how important meeting the species needs of horses actually is. A lot of horses that face extreme behavioral issues are that way because of lack of needs being met in their environment. A huge one that contributes to that is a lack of turnout and a lack of space to move and self-exercise, because you're putting a flight animal that's meant to cover lots of ground each day into a box and then expecting them to not be explosive when you bring them out, which isn't a reasonable thing to expect. So meeting their needs can correct a lot of behavioral problems that people view solely as training problems, and they'll correct them a lot more quickly and result in much more long-term better changes than what you otherwise would have if you just viewed the behavior as a training issue. Magic is hanging out with the rest of the herd on the grass. They have a whole track, so they can leave that at any point and go wander. But Derry's staring at me. We're gonna go catch him. He catches me. but grab snack first. Hi, buddy. Hey, Stinky. What's up? Here, I'm introducing a flag to Magic for the first time at this property, and as you can see, he's very curious and he's very calm and he's not being overly reactive or nervous. This is something that if I tried to bring out a flag in his previous living situation, I would have had massive explosions and he just wouldn't have been able to cope with it. But he's very calm and focused on the training and he's more able to retain the information that I'm teaching him because he's at a way lower state of stress. And now we're actually making much more progress in training per session because he's actually in a headspace where he's taking in the information being taught instead of just being in a chronic state of fight or flight mode where he's looking for threats and just looking to react. So these are the types of things we've been working on so far, is just the groundwork, the relaxation in the arena, and walking around, halting, and responding to vocal cues, responding to light amounts of pressure on the halter, and standing at the mounting block and whatnot. And he's doing fantastic. And soon we're going to start reintroducing stuff related to riding now that he's in a much better headspace. And I predict that he's going to be far more predictable and less reactive because we've been listening to him. And this is why it is so important to look at the whole picture of what your horse is doing and why they are reacting the way that they are, because so much of their bad reactions that make people frustrated or make horses dangerous to handle are directly related to management situations or how people are handling them. And what they really need is just more understanding, not more punishment, not a more aggressive handler, not for you to pretend to be the alpha in the relationship. They need a partner who's going to take a leadership role in acknowledging their emotional state and actually listening to their communication, even when their communication is hard to hear, because they're not always going to tell us what we want to hear. They're not always going to behave how we want them to. They're animals and they struggle with the environments that we put them in sometimes. And it's our job to help them cope and to make it a better situation for them. A lot of the horses who are the most misunderstood and the most difficult are the ones who are just begging and screaming to be heard and to have their needs met. And Magic was one of those horses. And I'm really glad that his owner was willing to listen to what he had to say and make all these changes because he is a completely different horse now.